Hello and welcome to the Backlot 605 box office bonus episode where every week we talk about just top tens of whatever we want to talk about at the box office here. Uh, and this week, Derek has a very, very good one here for us this week, don't you, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. It's Batman month on Backlot 605,
hmm
and we've just come off of the opening weekend of The Batman.
hmm
Because after so many imitation Batmans over the years, we finally got the real deal.
We got
So,
the Batman.
yeah. So, I figured let's just rip the band aid off and let's talk about Batman movies in box office history and see
hmm
how they've shaped up over the years, as well as kind of set the stage for where the Batman has to go to send its way up that list.
Yeah. What kind of criteria do we have for this week? Because there's different ways that we could probably hack and slash this top 10 this week.
Yeah, so obviously theatrical movies, so the 800 billion DC animated movies that went straight to video won't be on this list. Batman has to be a significant character in
hmm
these movies, so we're not going to do like we're not doing Joker because obviously it's little Bruce Wayne who basically shows up to have his parents murdered, or we're not counting Suicide Squad because there's one scene of Batfleck in that movie, or we're not even counting like the Lego movie and the Lego movie 2 because Batman's pretty much a supporting character in those movies. So
We're
movies
sorry, Will.
yeah, we'll make it up to Will. Will will be on this list. We'll get to that. But yeah, significant Batman presence in a movie is basically what counts for this list.
I think that's a very good and justified response to that. Sorry, Will. But you are correct. There's going to be some way, shape, or form we will somehow end up with a Lego Batman movie in some shape or form of list that we're going to make. It'll
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. Just watch.
We'll get there. All right. So top 10 Batman movies at the box office. Clearly with on we kind of saw this coming in. Number one, The Dark Knight comes in at $533.721 million. I mean, honestly, I expected this one to be at number one just because with all the hype this movie got with the Heath Ledger Joker and just how well the Nolan trilogy was, or how Batman Begins helped solidify that universe and whatnot. Um, this movie was just expected.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about on the previous show this week about like how Batman Begins, opened, somewhat smallish, but gained a lot of legs through home video and DVD
hmm
and all of that. And then, of course, that movie ended with the teaser of the Joker making his way into this trilogy. So obviously that starts building the hype. And then Heath Ledger gets announced, and there are a lot of people who think like Heath Ledger, he'll be an awful Joker. And
hmm
then as the photos leaked out, and then we start to see like the trailers, obviously people thought like, hey, he's going to be pretty good in this. And then on top of that, we had Heath Ledger's passing, which occurred in January of 2008, about 6 months before the movie that came out. But after the marketing had already started, we had started to see footage of Heath Ledger,
hmm
in character. And we've seen that at the box office from time to time, where movies have that surge because of the passing of one of its main actors. We saw this with Furious 7 and Paul Walker. So that just built that up.
Yeah.
And then, of course, obviously, the movie comes out. It has a great critical response. A lot of acclaim for Heath Ledger to the point where he ultimately gets an Oscar for that performance.
hmm
And then, of course, it just dominated the conversation for months on end. In a year where obviously we had the first Iron Man as well. But this movie blew past that. One of the rare, you know, one of the last times that DC would easily blow past Marvel at the box office, but didn't happen that much after that. So
No, right, right. Yeah, and ever since then, DC's just basically like, I think I can, I think I can. Um, and not to go completely off topic, but I will certainly say in regards to the instance of Heath Ledger's passing, myself personally, I would always recommend the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, the movie he was making at the time of his passing.
yep,
A movie that I think a lot of people don't know about. It's Terry Gilliam behind the things of like 12 Monkeys and Adventure Munchausen and Monty Python and just the way they did that movie. I would recommend anybody that is, especially if being a Heath Ledger fan, to watch that movie.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely found a very interesting way to complete that movie.
Hmm.
So for that alone, and getting the additional talent involved to basically complete that performance in a
Yes.
roundabout way is impressive too. So
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. Coming in at number two, the completion to the Nolan trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, comes in at $448.14 million. Just a few years later. This is one of those ones where I do think, you make mention in regards to Heath's passing before The Dark Knight comes out and how that reverberated into box office sales and stuff like that. Not to take away from Tom Hardy or Marion Cotillard's performances in The Dark Knight Rises, but I think because of the what we had coming going into The Dark Knight, I don't think The Dark Knight Rises had necessarily the overall legs to beat its predecessor just because of the Heath Ledger, history before the movie even released.
yeah, I mean, certainly Tom Hardy tried, and you
Mhm.
can argue that Bane is kind of its own iconic performance,
Mhm.
kind of set off the whole like Tom Hardy has his voice obscured by mask trend in his movies. Or you mentioned Marion Cotillard, but also mentioning Anne Hathaway as Catwoman. That
True.
was something that a lot of people was looking forward to as well.
Mhm.
So you're absolutely right with that. I know this movie also kind of took a little bit of a dip because, as some of you may recall, the midnight opening of The Dark Knight Rises led to the Aurora, Colorado shooting, which kind of put a somber tone on that opening weekend. Certainly not something that people wanted, or were expecting, but something that certainly put a damper on what was intended to be a big weekend for a big movie.
Mhm.
And obviously in retrospect a lot of people might argue that The Dark Knight Rises is the least or I shouldn't say the worst in the trilogy. It's a very very strong movie with a lot of great set pieces,
Mhm.
but obviously you know trying to unite this trilogy and bring it home. It's a tough task. And Nolan did as well as he could do. And there's still a lot of great stuff in it, but
Mhm.
it's just hard to pull off. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I would certainly say is that does the events of like those midnight showings and how things have changed since then and whatnot. I mean, if anything, I kind of like how things have kind of shifted around in the industry because now we have our Thursday previews more
yep,
prominent,
yep,
even into Wednesday and Tuesday previews, depending on how we're doing it. Because like how we did for the Batman, so like I don't mind the fact that I don't have to be at the theater at midnight and getting done at 1, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, where I can be like, I'll go to a 7 o'clock on a Thursday. I can live with that.
yeah. I mean, could you imagine going to a midnight opening of the Batman, knowing that
Oh,
you would be at the theater until about 3:30 a.m.?
yeah. Can you imagine that staff going, "Thank you, we don't have to be here until 3:30 in the morning. Oh, get to sleep in." Yes, so no, uh, it's horrible what happened, but I think it did allow us an understanding and a better way to shift how we do the previews for movies that release on those weekends, and I actually think it was for the benefit and the best, not only for the patrons, but for the, staff, to be honest. Like, again,
Absolutely.
the staff doesn't wanna be there at 2 o'clock in the morning. Um,
No, no.
so, that being said, we're gonna go into number 3, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, $330.36 million. This is one of those ones where though 330 doesn't sound like it's small potatoes, I do think it is one of those ones where I think that Warner Brothers and DC were definitely thinking, "Hey, if we've got Henry Cavill as Superman, we've got Ben Affleck as Batman. This is going to trump whatever we got because now we got our two powerhouse, tent pole characters in one singular film. Let's ignore what other things that we're going to bring into this and whatnot." Um, but to me, I feel that this movie did not do as well as probably Warner Brothers and DC hoped and expected it to do.
No, I mean this was as were able to see in retrospect, uh, DC was kind of trying to leapfrog their way to the Avengers in a way, and
Hmm.
this was originally intended to be like a straight sequel to Man of Steel, but then they decided, okay, we're going to cram in Batfleck, and we're going to introduce Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman into here as well, and we're just
Hmm.
going to mash all these things together. I mean, there's even the setup for like the Flash and Aquaman and all those
Oh, that
guys in this
and
movie
there's
too.
and it was so bad. Like I don't mind Batman v Superman for what it is and whatnot, but the fact that they basically tried to do the reverse engineer, if you will, of an Avengers movie. Let's show everybody before we give them their standalone movies, and I don't think it was the right way to go because, like you said, we get to see the Flash, we get to see Aquaman in this, but all it basically is here's a 3-second video clip
Yep.
on a computer screen, and it's just I don't know. Their idea of I think they should have just like you said, this was supposed to start out as a sequel to Man of Steel. That's just what they should have gone with it, and maybe hint at a couple characters or something like that, but not try to cram everything in to be like, guess what? Next thing is going to be Justice League.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, DC was just absolutely trying to chase Marvel's success.
Hmm.
I don't even know if you remember this, but there was actually a brief period of time because this opened like Easter weekend of 2016, and originally Warner Brothers was going to open this on. I kid you not, they actually had set a release date for the first weekend of May in 2016, which is the same day as Captain America: Civil War. And for a brief period of time, Warner Brothers was adamant, yeah, we're going to open the same day as the Marvel movie. They ultimately blinked, but it showed just how much they were trying to intimidate them by like saying, "Nope, we're going to get our own Avengers," and well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So,
And Disney's probably just like, yeah, you are. Let's see how long this lasts. Yep, we were right. Coming in at number 4, which kind of leads me to what I was saying about Batman v Superman, is a Batman, the Michael Keaton, uh, Jack Nicholson, Tim Burton directed 1989 Batman comes in at $251.19 million. The fact that we're talking about a movie as big and grandiose as Batman v Superman basically doesn't even take $100 million leap over a movie that is, you know, 20. I can't even do my
yep,
own math today here.
33 years old.
Thank you, 33 years, to it, and to be like, this just goes to show what Michael Keaton's Batman did for Warner Brothers and for superhero movies in 1989.
Oh yeah, I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember just how much of a big event this was in the summer of '89. We're in a
Hmm.
movie that was filled with all sorts of other big titles like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Ghostbusters 2 and Lethal Weapon 2 and various others.
Hmm.
This was the event to top them all, and certainly it was unavoidable at that point in
Hmm.
time. The toys, the merchandising, the t-shirts with the classic yellow bat logo on it, the
Hmm.
Prince soundtrack, all that stuff. It was an event, and certainly the movie that shaped the way for you know block for superhero movies being the blockbusters that they are
Yeah.
today. I mean, there were blockbusters before that, like with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, but this turned it into an absolutely new level. And so it's
Yeah.
very important.
Oh, I completely agree. And if you check out the episode that we do on Batman '89, you actually say exactly you lead into one of the things that I brought up is yes, we had the Christopher Reeves Superman in the late '70s, early '80s, and whatnot that kind of opened up the door to say, hey, we can make a superhero movie and be successful with it. For the most part, once we get into the latter half or the latter parts of Superman, it gets a little crazy. Um, but I think I made mention of this. I said flat out is I believe the success of Michael Keaton and the 1989 Batman is what paved the way for Marvel to be what Marvel is today, because the real first big Marvel property that took a chance was 98's Blade,
Yep.
where it's one of those like obscure kind of characters where if you don't put a Marvel, you don't put they didn't put Marvel's name on it,
No.
you know, and that it was one of those things because they tried that a quote unquote little bit with Howard the Duck, and we know how that went. And to the point where you're like, all right, we can use Blade. They gave it to New Line and be like, hey, if this is successful in 98, then we get, X-Men in 2000, we get Spider-Man in 2002. And then all of a sudden, oh, wait, this is starting to, it took a few years between 89's Batman, but it's one of those things where it's like, I feel that if 89's Batman wasn't successful, they wouldn't have taken that gamble with Blade almost 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, I mean, they were working on, they've been working throughout the '90s to get like a Spider-Man movie made, like with James
Yeah.
James Cameron trying to get his Spider-Man movie off the ground and stuff like that. So it was going to happen eventually.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, I mean, Blade was the one that was able to kind of squeak it out first because it was a smaller property. People weren't assuming much from it, and it took off, and it showed even in that form, there was an appetite for that. So
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where if I would say to anything to Warner Brothers is, take the Keaton Batman and be like, hey, this is definitely what opened those floodgates of the last 30 years, basically.
yep.
Coming in at number 5, Justice League, $229.02 million. And kind of to my point, what I said about Batman v Superman and the way that they tried to kind of cram everything in as quickly as they did, I think that I honestly I do feel that if DC would have just taken pace and be like, all right, there is a little bit of a formula we're not necessarily going to mirror and mimic to what Marvel is doing, but maybe tried not do what they did. I think they would have done so much better with Justice League overall, to the point where it didn't even surpass, by again the $100 million mark, basically, to the predecessor of from before.
Yeah, I mean, certainly this movie took a big hit because a lot of people did not like Batman v Superman.
Hmm.
And so going into this, it's like, oh, it's Zack Snyder again, and most of the same people from that previous movie. It's not going to fare. Excuse me, it's not going to fare as well. Um, you know, and this it is especially shocking because you also have to keep in mind that between Batman v Superman and Justice League was the release of the first Wonder Woman movie, which is
Hmm.
a huge hit. It did 400 million plus.
Yep.
And so there was that thought of like, oh, because that came out in June of 2017. And even if there was some mixed reaction to Batman v Superman, there's the thought process of, oh well, this has new Wonder Woman content on the big screen 5 months after the hugely successful Wonder Woman solo feature, and that did even help it.
Yep.
I think people really wised up to the fact that DC was kind of just trying to rush to the point where they had their own Avengers. And I think let me put it this way. The Avengers, the very first Avengers, opened to like $207 million. That was its opening weekend.
Hmm.
And Justice League's total is like 22 million more than that.
For its entire run.
Yeah. So that, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of like this is supposed to be like the big buildup that DC and Warner Brothers was working toward,
Hmm.
and it bombed. I mean,
Hmm.
it's far from me to call a 229 million grossing movie a bomb, but they had high expectations for it, and it did not get those.
Yeah. I would definitely agree. That's where it's like, sometimes you just have to read the room. And just necessarily because somebody's doing something one way and you want to do a different way doesn't necessarily mean that different way is the right way to go about it. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you got to play like Marvel has done. Sometimes you got to play that long game.
Yeah, and if anything, DC's had more success, just letting, just doing one-offs and special things like the aforementioned Joker, where it just kind of goes in its own direction. It isn't tied to a universe.
Hmm.
That can kind of help too. So
And I also do think, I mean, maybe we get a little bit of this with the Zack Snyder's his HBO version of the Justice League and whatnot. But if there's one thing I think DC has done well, and that it's something that I know that Marvel Marvel will play in the sandbox a little bit now that they've got the Fox properties, and we've talked about Deadpool and whatnot. But if there's one thing that DC is doing well and whatnot, is willing to go darker, grittier with an
Yep.
R rating,
Yep.
and know how to be able to make some good money off of it. So it's like, hey, it's like, hey, you see these flashing lights over here, DC, maybe, and Warner Brothers, maybe you should look over here and see what is working for you here, because just because they're doing it over here this way doesn't necessarily mean you have to. So
Yep.
where I do say that they need to play the long game, like what Marvel has been doing, I do think they need to understand that they can't do what Marvel is doing. They need to find what's working for them, and make the money based off of. I'm sorry, I I think you could get away with an R-rated Batman at least. Superman might be a little trickier, but Batman easily, I think you could get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's that recognition too of as DC, you can do stuff that Disney will never do, and I think
Hmm.
they've certainly recognized that because in the past few years alone, we had R-rated movies like Joker and Birds of Prey and the Suicide Squad.
Yep.
So they definitely have learned that lesson a little bit later than they probably would have hoped, but they've learned it. So
Yeah. All right, coming in at number 6, Batman Begins, the one that started the Nolan trilogy, $205.34 million. Um, like I kind of mentioned in regards to yesterday's episode and whatnot, I don't see this as a bad number for the sake of the Nolan trilogy, because this is the reintroduction of yet another version of someone playing Batman, um, and you have the history and the now established universe of when The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises comes out. So, I mean, honestly, for this one here, coming in at number 6 at a 205 million for its run, I think it's a pretty good solid run for 2005.
yeah, I think you have to look at it a few different ways. The first being that, in moviegoers' eyes, this is very much a reset. This is
Hmm.
the first time Batman has come to the big screen in 8 years, following Batman and Robin. And obviously, by this point, Batman and Robin's reputation is well known. And so
Hmm.
there's the appeal of like, okay, we have to do something different here, and kind of reestablish the trust of the audience with a movie like this.
Hmm.
I think it's also clear that, this is also a movie that's not using very well known villains. The
True.
Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul. I mean, they're names, but they're not, as iconic names as like the villains that were in it. And I think it's to Nolan's credit that he doesn't use villains that have been used in, you know, Batman movies
Yeah.
prior. That's a big thing. You also have to keep in mind, at this point, Christian Bale is not, a huge star. I mean, obviously, he's done stuff like American Psycho at this point, and his
Hmm.
kiddie stuff like Empire of the Sun and Newsies. But obviously, this is the role that propels him to kind of like that superstardom that gets him bigger and better things like Terminator Salvation or his Oscar
Hmm.
for The Fighter. So that's still very somewhat early in his career. It's a very transformative movie for him in that regard.
Oh, I would agree. And you make mention in regards to some of his filmography prior to this movie and whatnot. And the first thing I was going to tell you is I could tell you at least a couple people of my own personal friends and whatnot that would not go see Batman Begins because American Psycho scared the living shit out of them, and they couldn't get that image of that version of Christian Bale out of their mind to be able to justify to be able to go see him on the big screen.
Oh
So,
wow.
you know, there are those kind of people that are like, there's certain actors, like for instance, that they wouldn't go see an Anthony Hopkins movie because Hannibal Lecter scares the crap out of them. If you have a performance like that is as strong as it is, I could actually kind of see some of that kind of. Obviously, it's not the kind of thing that's going to be like $100 million difference or whatnot. But you have some of these movies where the movies before them, these actors be like, well, I'm not going to go see that because I don't like this, or something like that. So, yeah, I have a couple people that are like Christian Bale, literally still to this day scares the crap out of them because of American Psycho.
That is wild. I never would have thought about that, but that in retrospect, that makes sense.
Yeah. Coming in at number 7, the beautifully put together. I'm sorry, I like this movie. Batman Forever, coming in $184.03 million. Uh, if there's one thing I enjoyed about That's I don't think Batman Returns has one, but if there's one thing I've always loved about those first four like main Batman movies, this one specifically included, the soundtracks.
Yep.
Um, Batman Forever coming $184.03 million. This is I mean I guess for 95, this is kind of where I see because this is still early on. Those the pre boom of the comic book movies of the early 2000s and whatnot. So I think this does, pretty well considering it really doesn't have much for competition in the 90s.
No, I mean, and again, this is kind of performing a little bit of a franchise reset as
Mm-hmm.
well. It's still considered part of the 80s, 90s Batman series, but obviously it's the first movie without Tim Burton at play for reasons we'll get into in a little bit. It's becoming a much more of a poppier franchise, one that's kind of indulging in the 60s ish Batman roots a little bit with
Mm-hmm.
the 90s Gussie on top of it. And of course, the soundtrack. I mean, the movie that forever implanted "Kiss from a Rose" by Seal into our heads, among other singles. Yeah, it has lasting power.
Welcome to high school.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is I think a big thing about this as well is Jim Carrey as the Riddler. This is the year after his '94 breakout year of Ace Ventura and The Mask and Dumb and Dumber. So this is
Mm-hmm.
his first movie on the heels of that as the Riddler, and people are like, "Ooh, that's a big thing." And then Tommy Lee Jones, who had just won an Oscar the year before for The Fugitive, they were certainly casting big with this movie,
Mm-hmm.
at least in its villains. So
No, I would definitely agree. And I mean, if in hindsight you look at the performances and everything like that, and there has been stories as to the way some of the performances are and why they are, especially between Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones. But even for 95, even for is it a great Batman movie comparative to some of the other ones? It definitely has its troubles and whatnot. But you can clearly tell this is a 90s Batman movie,
yep,
and it definitely shows. And I love it for, you kind of reference like the 66 Batman kind of thing. um that's one of the things. I'm not a big fan of 66 Batman, not to take away from Adam West, because I love the Adam West delivery of Batman and whatnot, but just the show just in general. But like I love the campiness that is the Batman Forever and the Batman and Robin. They're are they great movies? No. Are they campy? They are campy as hell.
yes, sir.
Uh, all right. So then we go into Lego form. Our number eight, the Lego Batman movie, $175.75 million. I mean, I guess for the sake of a Lego movie, this is the fact that this has even made a top 10 list either says one of two things. A, we're running out of Batman movies to talk about. Or the fact that, this actually is in the top 10 because it's done better than some of other Batmans prior to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a genuinely great movie. As I've thought about it. Because obviously, with the original Lego movie, it was 3 years prior in 2014. Willow's Batman was kind of the scene stealing character from that movie,
Hmm.
just kind of tearing, the dark and gritty persona of Batman a new one. So it makes sense that they would kind of make his own movie out of that. Um, as well as, and they cast the new Lego Batman movie very well, because like Michael Cera as Robin, a very cheery and chipper voice. Ray Fiennes as Alfred is a hoot, and Zach Galifianakis, is kind of the frenemy Joker, who's kind of got like a love hate relationship with him, and they really milk
Hmm.
that for all it's worth. So it's a very well done movie in terms of kind of like Batman as an intellectual property,
Hmm.
as well as the fact that it pays tribute to all of the iterations of Batman on screen that have come before it, as well as the fact the way they just kind of cram like seemingly every single Batman villain into this movie, even if it's just like for a fleeting one shot cameo,
Hmm.
is also impressive too.
The one thing I will give this here, and this is just a showing of what, you know, 30 years has really done for the movie industry. Is like, I mean, like this is a movie where like partly in my nerdum and whatnot, my kids love comic book type things and whatnot. They play the hell out of the Injustice game at the arcade. But like this is a good like entry comic book ish to give to small kids and whatnot. Where I think of like when we were younger, when we were kids, our entry into Batman was '89 Batman, and
Yep.
that was that like what could and should have been of like their entry versus our entry. We had the nightmare fuel.
Yes.
At least this is that gateway entry into like, oh, let's see what you guys think of this here. Legos are fun. Legos are cute. We had Jack Nicholson playing a gangster and, very disturbing imagery and whatnot. Be like, oh, I turned out okay.
Yeah, I mean, and they're doing more of that. I watched a trailer today for DC League of Super Pets, which is kind of like merging, the DC heroes with the Secret Life of Pets and stuff like that. Because they had a trailer where they have Keanu Reeves playing Batman in it. They're trying to, they're trying to find angles, across the spectrum, to give them their Batman, whether it be cartoons like Lego Batman and that, all the way to like hardcore all rated stuff like Joker and Birds of Prey. There's gonna
Yeah,
be a Batman vehicle, whatever your age is at this point, because there's money to be made.
absolutely. Yeah, I told Casey that there was no trailers in front of my release of the Batman, and he was like, "Really? You didn't even get the Super Pets?" I'm like, "No, but now I kind of wish I had." All right, coming in at number 9, the Tim Burton follow up, Batman Returns, $162.83 million, 92. Just goes to show that though being a good, solid follow up to the original Tim Burton Batman, there's no touching the original Tim Burton Batman in terms of the box office success that it had.
No, I mean, certainly in terms of trying to raise the stakes, villain wise by bringing in Michelle Pfeiffer as the instantly iconic Catwoman or Danny DeVito as the Penguin.
Hmm.
Obviously, them using up the Joker the first time around was a boost that, they weren't going to be able to repeat. But also, again, speaking to, we remember when this movie came out 30 years ago, and to your comment about Nightmare Fuel,
Oh,
certainly moviegoers and families in particular were not prepared for the images that were going to be in this movie. Um, you know, I think I saw like Casey's comment on Letterbox when he saw the Batman about they're selling Riddler toys for this movie, and I'm like, you don't remember what it was like to have had Batman Returns Happy Meal toys back
right?
in '92, which absolutely mind blowing in retrospect.
Oh yeah, I mean the merchandising for between Batman and Batman Returns, in those late, early '90s and whatnot, like you could not have Batman, and there was no way you could not have Batman in it, literally in your everyday life.
Nope.
Because I even made mention. This kind of goes back to the success of the '89 Batman, and I made mention of this on the main show to Andy because Andy and I were actually alive when this happened.
Yep.
Is the haircuts that literally Batman to the point was everywhere, like you said, the Happy Meals and whatnot. But no, I remember you could go to the barber, and if you got that nice clean, you can get the Bat logo etched into the side of your head, and
Yep.
you chuckle, but it's because you know that because you're old enough to remember these things.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, like to the point of Batman Returns again, there are reports of, like kids crying as they were leaving the theater of Batman
Hmm.
Returns because just the traumatizing stuff in that
Danny
particular movie.
DeVito was creepy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, who knew it could be that creepy? And I think that's always been the hope of, will people or will he ever be able to be as creepy as that again? It's a
Hmm.
truly disturbed performance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, and I tell anybody, have an opportunity, you want to see creepy Danny DeVito, that's the way to do it. Um, and on top of it too, granted he does creepy in many films and whatnot, even a couple of them that are also Tim Burton movies, is
Christopher
Christopher
Walken.
Walken in Batman Returns as
Yep.
Oswald
Mac.
Cobblepot's father. Oh my
Yep.
god.
Max Shrek. Yep.
Yes. Oh yeah, sorry, that's right. He wasn't. Never mind. You're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He played the
Yeah.
he played the boss. He played the boss.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was
Cobblepot's
still bad.
father is actually Paul Rubens.
Paul Rubens, right? Which who doesn't love Paul Rubens? All right, and then coming in at number 10, and I like how you put this to date because clearly by the time the end of this month happens, this movie will not be in the 10th spot. But the Robert Pattinson, Matt Reeves vehicle, The Batman, in its opening weekend, $128.5 million. And clearly, obviously, we're only at number 10 because this is literally only 4 days worth of, well, 4/5/6,
Yeah. Yeah.
with the way I find fascinating how they did the release of the previews for the Batman, but
Mm-hmm.
at least that's one of those ones where it's like, well, obviously Warner Brothers had a lot of confidence in this movie.
Yep.
Clearly, the theaters
Build
had
the
a
word of
lot of
mouth.
the theaters had a lot of confidence into the way that they designed the release and the previews for the Batman. Um, I think this is pretty solid, and I could easily see is that by the end of the month we're probably going to shoot more close to number 5 just in
Yeah.
the 4 weeks.
Oh, easily. I mean, I'm actually tempted, like on the main show in the weeks ahead, I might bring back this chart just to see like how the Batman is ascending up that list.
That would be
Because
fun. I think that'll be a fun little thing to kind of look at from week to week.
yeah, because we're going to be struggling to talk about stuff with the Batman eventually, knowing how long that movie's going to stick around. So I
Hmm.
might just actually do that because I think that'll be an interesting way to chart its journey as it ascends through the box office list.
You beat Batman Returns. You beat the Lego Batman. Are you going to beat Batman forever? Yes,
Yep.
yes, I would agree. I think that's pretty. I like that plan. I want to see how does the Robert Pattinson, how is he going to cement his legacy into his first foray, because I and obviously clearly we have not quote unquote got the green light for another Matt Reeves Robert Pattinson Batman movie.
But
You and
it's
I
going to
both
happen.
you both and I know that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how long before DC or before Warner Brothers says yes we are.
I would almost bet that by the time we do next week's show, Warner Brothers will have made the official announcement, not unlike what they did with Dune Part 2, where they're just waiting for the box office numbers to be like, yep, yep, America has spoken. They want more Batman, and we're going to give it to them. Here you go. That's
Yeah.
probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, I like Warner Brothers be like, we're gonna wait to see also the HBO numbers. I'm like, no, you're not. You're just using that as fuel to be like, here's when you're gonna get it. All right, so that has been our box office bonus episode for this week. Be sure to follow us every week as we talk about all sorts of fun top 10 lists here. Be sure to check us out every Monday as well when we talk about the box office of the week. Be sure to check us out on all our socials and subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to support the show on Patreon as well. What are we looking forward to next week? Since clearly we're doing a lot of Batman this month here, we've kind of, like you said, ripped the Band-Aid off. What next?
Yeah, so next week, again, as we talked about on the main show, there are no new movies coming to theaters next weekend. However, on Disney Plus, we're getting the next Pixar movie, Turning Red. So next week, we're going to take a look at Pixar movies at the box office because
Ooh.
once upon a time, Pixar movies used to come in theaters. So we'll look and see how that happened back in the day.
I wish there was a way that we could kind of like, like put into some sort of supercomputer. What would these movies, if they had released into theaters, like
Yes.
like Luca, like Soul, like how would they have actually performed? Because I think that would be a fascinating number.
Yeah, or how would Onward have done it? It played in the theaters for more than 1 week before COVID shut them down.
Oh,
That
that's
as well.
right. That
So,
is right.
yep.
That's right. The one week I actually got to get to that one in the theater before it shut down.
Yes.
All right. That has been our box office bonus for this week, and we will check you out here next week.
See you then.
Bye.